The emergency alarm echoed through the corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters, a massive space station that floated in the darkness between stars. Ambassador Zekthor of the Vranthi Empire rushed through the gleaming hallways, his forearms gesturing wildly as he barked orders to his assistants. Something unprecedented had happened, something that made his blood run cold despite his attempts to appear calm. The council chamber filled quickly with representatives from across the galaxy. The crystalline Nethera shimmered in their seats, their bodies reflecting the soft blue light of the chamber. The massive Gordoth delegates took up twice the space of anyone else, their thick armor plating scraping against the metal chairs. The delicate Soltari floated in their environmental bubbles, and dozens of other species filled the remaining spaces. But one section sat completely empty, the seats that had been occupied by humans for the past 3 years. Zekthor slammed his primary hand against the podium, calling the session to order. His voice boomed across the chamber as he spoke. The humans had gone silent. Every single one of them had stopped responding to communications. Their embassies had closed overnight, their diplomats had boarded ships and departed without explanation, and their vessels had retreated to human space. For 2 weeks now, the Council had received nothing but silence from Earth and its colonies. Ambassador Kelrus of the Soltari Collective raised a crystalline appendage to speak. His translated voice carried a note of concern that most others in the chamber did not share. He reminded the Council that humans had been reliable partners, that Captain Jake Morrison had helped negotiate the trade agreements with the Outer Rim worlds, and that diplomat Lisa Harper had worked tirelessly to establish cultural exchange programs. Their sudden withdrawal made no sense unless something serious had provoked it. The Vranthi ambassador dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. Humans were emotional creatures, he said, prone to irrational behavior and childish outbursts. They had probably taken offense at some minor diplomatic slight and would return once they had time to calm down. The Nethera representative agreed, adding that humans were still young by galactic standards and needed time to mature. Several other delegates nodded in agreement, and the chamber filled with the sounds of dismissive chatter. Only Kelrus remained unconvinced. He had worked closely with the humans during the Outer Rim crisis, when pirates had threatened several frontier colonies. He had watched Captain Morrison develop tactics that drove the raiders away with minimal casualties. He had seen Lisa Harper negotiate a peaceful resolution to a territorial dispute that could have led to war. The humans were resourceful, creative, and far more capable than most species gave them credit for. Their silence worried him deeply. The debate continued for hours, but in the end, the Council decided to take no action. The humans would return when they were ready, or they would not. Either way, the galaxy would continue without them. Zekthor adjourned the session, confident that the matter would resolve itself within a few weeks. Far away from the Council station, in the heart of human space, a very different meeting was taking place. President Helen Carter sat at the head of a long table in a secure conference room, deep beneath the surface of Earth. Around her sat the most powerful figures in human government and military command. Their faces were grim, their voices low and controlled. Commander Greg Patterson stood at the front of the room, a holographic display showing behind him. He had been the one to send the final message to the Council, the simple statement that humanity was withdrawing from galactic affairs. Now he explained why. For months, human intelligence had been gathering evidence, piecing together a pattern that no one had wanted to believe. The Galactic Council had been lying to them from the very beginning. Dr. Amy Wells stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly as she activated another set of images. She was the head of human intelligence, and her team had uncovered the truth. The Council had been systematically suppressing human technological development. Every time human scientists made a breakthrough, Council representatives would suggest modifications, offer alternative approaches, or recommend delays for safety testing. At first, it had seemed like helpful guidance from more experienced civilizations. But the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Human research stations had been monitored by Council ships conducting illegal surveillance. Patents and discoveries had been stolen and shared with Council member species. Human colonies had been manipulated through economic pressure to prevent Earth from expanding too quickly. The Council had even sabotaged several human vessels, making the incidents look like accidents or equipment failures. Captain Jake Morrison spoke next, his voice tight with anger. He had discovered the truth by accident when his ship, the Horizon, had experienced a mysterious power failure near a council station. His chief engineer had found a small device attached to the reactor core, a device that matched council technology. When Morrison had quietly investigated further, he found evidence of similar sabotage on at least a dozen other human ships. The council had been crippling human vessels to keep them dependent on council support and technology. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For 3 years, humanity had believed they were joining a community of equals, that they were learning from elder races who wanted to help them advance. Instead, they had been victims of a carefully orchestrated program to keep them weak and dependent. The council feared human potential and had worked to suppress it before humanity could become a threat to their power. President Carter looked around the table at her advisors and military commanders. The vote had already been taken in a previous session, but she asked again to be certain. Should humanity withdraw from the Galactic Council and pursue its own path forward? Every hand in the room rose without hesitation. The decision was unanimous. Carter gave the order to activate protocols that had been prepared over the past month. All human personnel would return from council space. All diplomatic channels would be closed. All shared technology and research would be secured behind military encryption. Humanity would go dark, and the council would receive no explanation beyond the simple message already sent. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them realize too late that they had made a terrible mistake. As the meeting adjourned, Carter stood alone for a moment, looking at the holographic display of Earth floating above the table. Humanity had always been underestimated by the galaxy, always dismissed as young and naive. But humans had a long history of surprising those who tried to control them. The Council had no idea what they had unleashed by betraying Earth's trust. They would learn soon enough that humanity did not forgive easily, and they never forgot. 3 months had passed since humanity went silent, and the Galactic Council barely noticed at first. The massive bureaucracy continued its work without interruption. Trade agreements were processed through automated systems that had been set up years ago. Diplomatic sessions continued with other species filling the roles that humans had once held. Ambassador Zekthor congratulated himself on predicting that the humans would simply fade into irrelevance once they stopped participating. But small problems began appearing at the edges of council space. Frontier colonies reported unusual activity. Ships disappeared without sending distress signals. Automated defense stations went offline with no explanation. The council dismissed these incidents as routine technical failures or minor pirate activity. No one connected the dots until the Kryn swarm attacked. The Kryn were an insectoid race that had plagued the frontier for decades. They lived in massive hive ships and attacked in overwhelming numbers, consuming resources and leaving devastation in their wake. The council had managed to keep them contained through constant patrols and quick response forces. Captain Jake Morrison and his tactical officer Lieutenant Ryan Brooks had been instrumental in developing the countermeasures that kept the Kryn at bay. Their strategies had saved countless lives and protected dozens of colonies. Without human support, the council's response to the new Kryn offensive was slow and disorganized. The species that had mocked human tactical doctrine now discovered they had no effective replacement. The Kryn swept through 3 frontier systems in 2 weeks, destroying colonies and killing millions. Refugees flooded toward the core worlds, bringing stories of horror and demanding protection that the council could not provide. Ambassador Zekthor called another emergency session, though this time the chamber buzzed with angry voices instead of dismissive laughter. The Vranthi military commanders demanded more ships and resources. The Nethera representatives insisted on better coordination. The smaller species accused the council of incompetence. Everyone had complaints, but no one had solutions. Kelrus of the Soltari collective spoke quietly, but his words cut through the noise. He suggested that perhaps the council should reach out to humanity and request their assistance with the Kryn threat. After all, the humans had developed the most effective tactics against the swarm. Several delegates shouted him down, calling it weakness to beg help from a species that had abandoned its obligations. Zekthor seized on the anger in the room and proposed a different approach. He argued that humanity had made commitments to mutual defense when they joined the council. Their withdrawal did not absolve them of those obligations. The council should send a delegation to Earth and demand that humans honor their agreements. The proposal passed with overwhelming support, though Kelris abstained from the vote and warned that this approach would end badly. The delegation was assembled quickly, led by Vranthi Commander Thelkor, a military officer known for his aggressive tactics and supreme confidence in Vranthi's superiority. He commanded a massive dreadnought called the Fist of Justice, a warship that had never lost a battle. Thelkor boasted that if the humans refused to cooperate, he would demonstrate the consequences of defying the Council's authority. The delegation arrived at the edge of human space 2 weeks later, their sensors immediately detecting a single human vessel waiting for them. The ship was a frigate designated as the Defiant, small compared to Thelkor's massive dreadnought. The commander laughed when he saw it, telling his crew that the humans were either foolish or suicidal to send such a tiny ship to face them. Captain Nicole Gray commanded the Defiant, and her voice came through the communication channel clear and steady. She delivered a message from President Helen Carter that was direct and unambiguous. Humanity owed the Council nothing, as the Council had violated every principle of partnership through their surveillance, theft, and sabotage. Any unauthorized entry into human territory would be considered an act of war, and violators would be destroyed without further warning. Thelkor responded with contempt, informing Captain Gray that his ship could vaporize her vessel with a single shot. He accused humans of delusion and cowardice. He gave her 1 minute to move aside before he would demonstrate Vranthi power. Gray's response was a single word that made Thelkor's blood boil with rage. She said no. The Vranthi commander ordered his weapons officer to disable the human ship with a warning shot. The Fist of Justice powered up its massive plasma cannons, weapons that could crack a moon in half. Thelkor wanted to teach these upstart humans a lesson about respecting their betters. His finger moved to authorize the shot, but the weapons officer suddenly screamed a warning. The Defiant had fired first, but not with any weapon the Council recognized. Beams of pure energy lanced out from the small frigate, moving faster than anything Thelkor had ever seen. The dreadnought's shields, which had never failed in 50 years of combat, collapsed instantly. The beams carved through the armor plating like it was paper, cutting precise lines across the hull. Explosions rippled through 3 decks as power conduits overloaded. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. Thelkor stared at his damage reports in disbelief. His mighty dreadnought was crippled. Life support was failing in multiple sections, and the main reactor was offline. The Defiant hung in space without a single mark on its hull, its weapons still powered and ready. Captain Gray's voice came through the channel again, offering them exactly 60 seconds to begin retreating before she finished what she had started. The Fist of Justice limped away, trailing debris and atmosphere from ruptured compartments. Thelkor sat in his command chair in stunned silence, unable to process what had just happened. The weapons the human ship had used were decades beyond anything the Council possessed. The speed, the power, the precision, all of it spoke to technology that should not exist. The humans had been holding back, operating far below their actual capabilities while they were part of the Council. News of the encounter spread through Council space like wildfire. The official report tried to minimize the incident, claiming that the Fist of Justice had experienced technical difficulties and that no actual combat had occurred. But too many people had seen the sensor data. Too many crew members from the dreadnought told the real story. Within days, every species in the Council knew the truth. Intelligence reports began flooding into Council headquarters from every direction. Human ships had been spotted in uncharted regions of space, moving at speeds that should be impossible. Massive construction projects had been detected around Earth and its colonies, building structures on a scale that dwarfed anything the Council had attempted. Energy signatures were being picked up that did not match any known technology in the galactic database. A Nethera scientist named Laura Bennett submitted a report that terrified the Council leadership. She had analyzed all available data on human technological progress over the past 3 months. Her conclusion was clear and undeniable. Without Council oversight and restrictions, humans had advanced their technology by at least 2 centuries. But they had not actually invented anything new. They had simply implemented all the discoveries and innovations that the Council had forced them to suppress over the past 3 years. Ambassador Zekthor read the report 3 times, each reading making his hands shake more violently. The Council had not been protecting the galaxy from dangerous human advancement. They had been sitting on a bomb of human potential, compressing it down through suppression and sabotage. Now that pressure had been released, and humanity was exploding forward at a rate that no one had thought possible. Kelrus stood before the council once more, his voice sad rather than angry. He had warned them that this would happen. He had told them that underestimating humanity was a mistake. Now the council faced a species that had every reason to hate them, and technology that could destroy them. The question was no longer whether humans would return to the council, but whether the council would survive humanity's anger. 6 months had passed since humanity went silent, and the Galactic Council was drowning in crisis. The Kryn swarm had taken advantage of the chaos and pushed deeper into council space with each passing week. 12 systems had fallen, and the death toll climbed into the billions. Economic systems strained without the human innovation and trade that had quietly become essential to galactic commerce. Several member species began questioning whether the council leadership was competent enough to protect them anymore. Ambassador. Kelrus stood before the council chamber and proposed what he believed was the only logical solution. The council should send a formal apology to humanity and request negotiations to repair the relationship. They should admit their mistakes openly and offer reparations for the surveillance and sabotage. The chamber erupted in angry shouts before he could finish speaking. Zekthor pounded his fist against the podium and declared that the council would never bow to a species that had abandoned its obligations. The Nethera representatives agreed, stating that admitting fault would undermine council authority across the galaxy. The Gordoth delegates argued that showing weakness to humans would encourage other species to rebel. Pride and fear united the council majority against any form of apology. Instead, they voted to authorize what they called a peacekeeping operation. The Vranthi military would assemble a massive armada and travel to human space. They would not attack, the council insisted, but would simply demonstrate overwhelming force to encourage humanity to return to diplomatic discussions. Fleet Admiral Drexnar was given command of the operation and told to bring 200 warships, the largest fleet the council had assembled in centuries. Drexnar accepted the command with grim determination. He had heard the reports about the Defiant and what it had done to Thelkor's dreadnought. He did not underestimate human capability the way some council members did, but he also believed that no species, no matter how advanced, could stand against 200 warships representing the combined military might of the Galactic Council. Numbers would prevail where individual strength had failed. The fleet assembled over 6 weeks, drawing ships from every corner of council space. Vranthi dreadnoughts formed the core of the armada, supported by Nethara carriers and Gordoth battlecruisers. Dozens of smaller species contributed frigates and destroyers. By the time Admiral Drexnar gave the order to depart, he commanded the most powerful military force the galaxy had seen in living memory. On Earth, Director of Defense Operations. Kate Sullivan watched the Council fleet's progress through deep space sensors that the Council did not know existed. The human monitoring network extended far beyond the boundaries of official human territory. Every move the Council made was observed and analyzed. Kate sent her reports directly to President Helen Carter, who convened her cabinet to discuss the appropriate response. Foreign Affairs Advisor Chris Murphy recommended sending one final warning before the Council fleet reached human space. Despite everything that had happened, he argued, humanity should give the Council one last chance to avoid catastrophe. Some cabinet members disagreed, saying the Council deserved whatever happened next, but President Carter sided with Murphy and authorized the warning message. Admiral Dan Foster received the order to deliver the warning personally. He was the commander of Earth's home fleet and spoke from the bridge of the Valiant, the first of humanity's new Liberation-class battleships. The ship was massive, dwarfing anything the Council had ever built, and bristled with weapons that represented the pinnacle of unrestricted human engineering. Foster's message to the approaching Council fleet was simple and clear. Turn back now or be destroyed. Here would be no further warnings. Fleet Admiral Drexnar received the transmission and studied the image of Admiral Foster on his command screen. He saw a human who looked calm and confident, standing on a bridge that was unlike anything in Council databases. The Valiant appeared in the background of the transmission, and Drexnar's tactical officers scrambled to analyze what they could see. Their reports made no sense. The power readings were impossible. The weapon configurations defied known physics. Either the humans were running an elaborate bluff, or they had achieved breakthroughs that should have taken millennia. Drexnar made his decision based on decades of military experience. No bluff would be so detailed or so confident. The humans were showing him exactly what they had because they wanted him to understand the danger. But he had his orders from the Council, and 200 ships at his command. He could not turn back without even attempting the mission. He ordered the fleet forward, but cautiously with all sensors active and weapons ready. The Council fleet crossed into human space near the colony world of New Boston. Drexnar expected to encounter patrol ships or perhaps a small defense force. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The sensors showed over 500 human warships arranged in a perfect defensive formation. Each vessel was larger and more heavily armed than anything in his fleet. The energy readings coming from those ships were astronomical, far beyond what any known technology could produce. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the horizon at the center of the formation. His ship had been heavily upgraded since the withdrawal, transformed from a capable patrol vessel into a warship that could level entire fleets. Beside him, Commander Stephanie Walsh positioned the destroyer Revenge, and Captain Peter Grant held position in the cruiser Thunderhead. Together they formed a battle line that could annihilate the Council fleet in minutes. Admiral Drexnar opened a channel to Admiral Foster, his voice steady despite the fear creeping through his body. He stated that he had come to negotiate humanity's return to the Council. Foster's response was cold. There would be no negotiations with an invading fleet. The Council had exactly 5 minutes to begin, withdrawing before humanity would interpret their presence as an act of war. The Vranthi Admiral looked at his tactical displays and ran combat simulations that made his officers pale with fear. Every scenario ended the same way. Total destruction of the Council fleet with minimal or no human losses. The humans had not even powered up their weapons to full capacity, but the passive energy signatures alone told the story. Each human ship carried enough firepower to destroy a dozen Council vessels. Drexnar gave the order to retreat before the 5 minutes expired. He was a proud warrior, but he was not suicidal. His fleet turned and began the journey back to Council space, moving slowly to maintain formation and preserve what dignity remained. Behind them, the human fleet watched but did not pursue. They had made their point without firing a single shot. The Council fleet's withdrawal became known as the New Boston Standoff, and news of it spread across the galaxy within hours. Admiral Drexnar submitted his resignation as soon as he returned to Council space, though the Council refused it. They needed him to explain what had happened, to make them understand how badly they had miscalculated. In the Council chamber, Zekthor listened to Drexnar's report in silence. The Admiral showed sensor data and tactical analyses that proved beyond doubt that humanity could destroy the entire Council military whenever they chose. The humans had not just advanced their technology, they had revolutionized it. Every suppressed innovation, every stolen discovery, every sabotaged breakthrough had been implemented and improved. Humanity had leaped forward while the Council remained stagnant. Ambassador Kelris rose to speak, and this time no one interrupted him. He stated what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say aloud. The Council had created its own nightmare. By suppressing humanity out of fear, they had guaranteed that when humans finally broke free, they would be unstoppable. By stealing from them and sabotaging them, the Council had given humanity every reason to hate them. The question now was whether humanity would be satisfied with independence, or whether they would seek revenge for 3 years of betrayal. The Galactic Council chamber descended into chaos over the following weeks. Member species demanded answers to questions that the leadership could not or would not answer. How had humanity advanced so quickly while the Council stagnated? Why had the Council antagonized a species with such obvious potential? Who had authorized the suppression program that had now backfired so catastrophically? Accusations flew between delegates. Old alliances crumbled and new factions formed overnight. Ambassador Zekthor stood at the podium day after day, defending decisions that even he no longer believed in. Finally, under pressure from dozens of species threatening to leave the Council, he revealed the truth that had been hidden for decades. The Council had maintained its power structure by systematically suppressing emerging species. Every time a new civilization joined the galactic community, the elder races would identify their strengths and quietly sabotage their development in those areas. Humanity had been their most controlled target, because human innovation and adaptability frightened the Council more than any other trait. The revelation shattered what remained of Council unity. The smaller species erupted in fury, realizing they had been victims of the same program that targeted humanity. Several delegations walked out of the chamber immediately. The Soltari Collective, led by Ambassador Kelris, formally announced they were breaking with Council policy and would pursue independent development. Within days, 8 other species followed their example. Kelris wasted no time reaching out to Earth directly. He sent a personal message to President Helen Carter requesting permission to visit and discuss a possible alliance. Carter agreed, though she made it clear that any meeting would happen on human terms, in human space at a time of humanity's choosing. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Kelris arrived at Earth aboard a small diplomatic vessel. He was accompanied only by his personal staff and brought no weapons or military escort. President Carter received him in her office in Geneva, surrounded by symbols of human achievement that had been accomplished without Council interference. Science Minister Eva Shaw and Trade Director Carl Mason joined the meeting to represent humanity's interests. Kelris began by apologizing, not just for the Council's actions, but for his own failure to stop them sooner. He admitted that he had suspected the suppression program existed, but had not fought hard enough against it. He shared everything he knew about the Council's operations, including detailed files on which species had been targeted and how. The information was extensive, covering dozens of civilizations that had been held back from their full potential. President Carter listened carefully, asking pointed questions and taking notes. She had Eva Shaw verify some of Kelris's claims against human intelligence data. Everything checked out. The Soltari ambassador was telling the truth, and the scope of the Council's manipulation was even worse than humanity had discovered on their own. While diplomatic discussions continued on Earth, the military situation in Council space grew desperate. The Kryn swarm had now conquered a third of what was once Council territory. The insectoid hordes showed no signs of slowing down, and Council forces suffered defeat after defeat. The tactics that Captain Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Ryan Brooks had developed were not written down anywhere that the Council could access. Without human coordination and strategic thinking, the Council's military response remained scattered and ineffective. Refugee camps swelled to bursting on the core worlds. Millions of displaced beings struggled to survive while their governments argued about who was responsible for the disaster. Crime increased, food supplies dwindled, and several planets teetered on the edge of civil unrest. The Council that had once seemed unshakable now looked like it might collapse entirely. Ambassador Zekthor found himself in an impossible position. The hardliners blamed him for being too soft on humanity. The reformers blamed him for not acting sooner to change Council policy. His own people, the Vranthi, began calling for his resignation, but he refused to step down, insisting that he needed to fix the problems he had helped create. In a move that shocked everyone, Zekthor requested a personal meeting with President Carter. He knew it was humiliating for someone of his status to beg for a meeting, but pride no longer mattered. The Council was dying, and only humanity had the power to save it or ensure its destruction. Carter agreed to meet him, but like Kelris, he would come to Earth and stand in her office as a supplicant rather than an equal. Zekthor arrived 2 weeks after Kelris had departed. The contrast between the two visits could not have been starker. Where Kelris had come with humility and honesty, Zekthor came with barely concealed desperation. He stood in President Carter's office, flanked by General Scott Palmer and Secretary of State Linda Hayes, facing a woman who held his civilization's fate in her hands. The Vranthi ambassador offered concessions that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Full technology sharing with no restrictions, financial reparations for the damage caused by sabotage, a permanent seat on the Council's inner decision-making body with veto power, formal apologies broadcast across all Council channels. He promised everything he could think of, speaking for hours about how the Council had learned from its mistakes and would never repeat them. President Carter listened politely, her face revealing nothing. When Zekthor finally finished, she let the silence stretch uncomfortably before responding. Her answer was simple and devastating. No. Humanity wanted no part of the Council's corrupt system. They had no interest in joining a power structure built on suppression and lies, even if that structure now promised to behave better. Zekthor's face fell, his forearms dropping to his sides in defeat. He started to argue, to plead, but Carter raised her hand to stop him. She was not finished speaking. She had a counter-proposal, one that the Council would accept or face irrelevance. The Council would completely dissolve its suppression programs and release all classified information about which species had been targeted. Every member species would receive full autonomy to develop their technology and culture without interference. The Council structure would be reformed from top to bottom, eliminating the elder race hierarchy and creating true equal representation. If the Council refused these terms, humanity would form its own alliance and invite any species that wished to join them in a genuinely cooperative galactic community. Carter gave Zekthor 48 hours to take the proposal back to the Council and get an answer. The ambassador departed Earth shaken and uncertain. He had come hoping to negotiate favorable terms. Instead, he carried an ultimatum that would either transform galactic civilization or destroy the Council entirely. The proposal reached the Council chamber within hours, and the debate that followed was the most intense in Council history. The hardliners called it unacceptable, arguing that dismantling the power structure would lead to chaos. The reformers insisted it was the only path forward. Smaller species that had been suppressed demanded the Council accept or face mass defections. Kelrus spoke passionately in favor of Carter's terms. He reminded the Council that humanity had every right to demand revenge, but instead offered a path to redemption. The Soltari had already committed to joining a human-led alliance if the Council refused. He knew of 16 other species prepared to do the same. While the Council debated, events moved quickly across the galaxy. Species that had felt powerless under Council rule suddenly saw an alternative. Within 24 hours of Carter's ultimatum becoming public, 17 species formally requested to join a human-led coalition. They sent delegations to Earth asking for protection, trade agreements, and technology sharing. The trickle became a flood as more species realized they no longer had to accept Council dominance. The Council faced a simple reality. They could accept humanity's terms and try to rebuild as equals, or they could refuse and watch their authority evaporate as species flocked to the human banner. Pride had led them to this moment, and pride would not save them now. Ambassador Zekthor called for a vote with 6 hours remaining on the deadline. The chamber fell silent as each delegate cast their decision. The vote was close, with traditional powers like the Vranthi and Gordoth split down the middle. But the smaller species voted overwhelmingly for reform, and their numbers carried the day. The Council accepted humanity's terms. Zekthor transmitted the decision to President Carter with minutes to spare. The message was brief and formal, containing none of his usual elaborate diplomatic language. The Galactic Council agreed to restructure as the Galactic Federation, with equal representation for all members and an absolute prohibition on suppression programs. They requested that humanity participate in the reformation process to ensure it was done properly. Carter read the message and allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had not sought to conquer the galaxy or take revenge on those who had wronged them. Instead, they had forced the galaxy to grow up, to abandon the old ways of dominance and control. It was a more complete victory than any military conquest could have achieved. The transformation of the Galactic Council into the Galactic Federation took 3 months of intense negotiation and restructuring. The old Council station was repurposed, with entire sections torn down and rebuilt to accommodate the new equal representation model. Species that had been relegated to outer chambers now had seats in the main hall. The Vranthi and other elder races found themselves sharing power with civilizations they had once dismissed as insignificant. Ambassador Zekthor remained in his position, though his role had changed dramatically. He was no longer the voice of Vranthi dominance, but rather one representative among many. The adjustment was painful for him, but he worked tirelessly to prove that the old guard could adapt to the new reality. He personally oversaw the release of classified files documenting decades of suppression programs, knowing that transparency was the only path to rebuilding trust. The hardliners who refused to accept the changes found themselves increasingly isolated. Several Vranthi military commanders resigned in protest, and a few Gordoth delegates withdrew from the Federation entirely. But most species embraced the reforms, recognizing that the alternative was irrelevance or destruction. The Federation would be weaker in some ways than the old Council, but it would be built on honesty rather than deception. On Earth, President Helen Carter addressed a joint assembly of human and allied species representatives. The hall was filled with delegates from 23 different civilizations, all of whom had chosen to align themselves with humanity's vision for galactic cooperation. Captain Jake Morrison stood at attention in his dress uniform, receiving commendations for his years of service. The crews of the Horizon, Defiant and Valiant, were honored for their role in demonstrating human strength without resorting to violence. Dr. Amy Wells stepped forward to present the results of collaborative research between human scientists and their new allies. The Nethera scientist Laura Bennett stood beside her, having chosen to leave the Federation and work directly with humanity. Together they had achieved breakthroughs in energy production and medical technology that would benefit all participating species. The research was shared freely, with no restrictions or hidden agendas, a stark contrast to how the old council had operated. President Carter outlined humanity's conditions for rejoining galactic civilization. Earth would maintain complete technological freedom with no oversight or restrictions. All species would receive the same freedom to develop as they saw fit. Developing civilizations would be protected and guided rather than suppressed and controlled. Trade and cultural exchange would be encouraged but never forced. Military cooperation would be voluntary and based on genuine mutual interest rather than obligation. Ambassador Kelris rose to accept the conditions on behalf of the newly formed Galactic Federation. His voice carried hope as he spoke about a new era of cooperation built on respect and equality. He acknowledged that the transition would be difficult and that mistakes would be made along the way. But the alternative, returning to the old ways of dominance and suppression, was no longer acceptable to anyone. The formal agreement was signed in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity officially rejoined galactic civilization, but on vastly different terms than before. Earth was not a junior partner seeking approval from elder races. They were an equal power, and their technology and military strength ensured that no one would forget it. The immediate crisis that had sparked the transformation still demanded attention. The Kryn swarm continued its rampage through what had been Council space, now threatening the new Federation's core worlds. The Federation military had proven incapable of stopping the advance, and millions more refugees fled ahead of the insectoid hordes. Captain Nicole Gray received new orders from Earth Command. The Defiant would lead a joint task force to the frontier, coordinating with vessels from multiple species to push back the Kryn advance. Her crew was supplemented with officers from the Soltari, Nethera, and even a few Vranthi who had proven themselves trustworthy. Commander Greg Patterson joined her as tactical coordinator, bringing with him the strategies that had once kept the Kryn contained. The mixed fleet assembled at the edge of Federation space, combining human warships with vessels from 6 different species. The contrast in technology was stark, with human ships dwarfing most of their allies. But Gray insisted that every ship had value and every crew had skills to contribute. She had learned from humanity's experience that underestimating others was a dangerous mistake. The Kryn attacked within hours of the fleet's arrival, sending wave after wave of hive ships in their typical overwhelming assault. The Federation vessels that had faced them before fell into panicked defensive positions, expecting another defeat. But this time they had human coordination and human weapons supporting them. Captain Gray issued calm, clear orders through the communication network. She positioned Federation PS to maximize their strengths while covering their weaknesses. Human vessels provided devastating firepower that shattered Kryn formations, while Allied ships exploited the openings with precision strikes. Commander Patterson's tactical analysis predicted Kryn movements before they happened, allowing the fleet to counter every assault. The battle lasted 8 hours, far longer than previous engagements. But when it ended, the Kryn were in full retreat for the first time in months. 3 hive ships had been destroyed completely, and a dozen more limped away trailing debris. The Federation fleet had taken damage but suffered no losses, a remarkable achievement against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. News of the victory spread rapidly, lifting spirits across the battered Federation. It was proof that the new cooperative model could work, that species working together as equals could achieve what the old hierarchical council could not. More importantly, it demonstrated that humanity was willing to use its superior technology to protect others, rather than dominate them. Captain Gray stood on the bridge of the Defiant and looked at her mixed crew working together seamlessly. The Soltari navigator plotted jump coordinates, while the Nethera engineer monitored power distribution. A Vranthi weapons officer who had once served under Commander Thelkor now took orders from a human captain without resentment. They had learned to trust each other through shared danger, and that trust was stronger than any treaty. Over the following months, the joint fleet pushed the Kryn back system by system. More species contributed ships and crews as confidence in the Federation's military capability grew. Human tactical doctrine spread through the fleet, adapted and improved by officers from dozens of different backgrounds. The Kryn, facing a coordinated and technologically superior force, retreated to their border regions and ceased their expansion. Ambassador Zekthor addressed the Federation Assembly and formally apologized for the Council's past actions. He spoke not in the elaborate diplomatic language he once favored, but in simple, direct words that left no room for misunderstanding. The Vranthi people were ashamed of what had been done in their name. They could not undo the past, but they would spend generations proving they had changed. President Carter watched the speech from Earth and felt something she had not expected to feel toward the old Council leadership. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Zekthor had been part of a corrupt system, but he was also working harder than anyone to dismantle it. That counted for something. The final scene of humanity's return to galactic civilization played out on the frontier, far from the political centers of power. Captain Nicole Gray sat in the Defiance observation lounge during a rare moment of downtime. Beside her, a young Soltari officer named Kren asked how humanity had managed to change everything so quickly. Gray smiled and told him the truth. Humanity had not changed the galaxy through military might or technological superiority, though those had certainly helped. They had changed it by refusing to accept a system built on lies and control. By simply saying no and meaning it, humans had forced everyone else to examine what they had been tolerating. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was just standing up and walking away. From Earth, a new transmission began broadcasting to the edges of known space. It was a simple message of welcome to any species seeking freedom and genuine partnership. The age of Council dominance was over, ended not by war or conquest but by one species refusing to be suppressed. The Galactic Federation would face many challenges in the years ahead, but it would face them as equals working together rather than masters controlling subjects. And it had all started because humanity had done something the galaxy thought impossible. They had cut off all diplomacy, disappeared into silence, and emerged stronger than anyone had imagined. The Council's panic at losing the humans had been entirely justified, but not for the reasons they originally feared. Humanity had not become a threat to galactic civilization. They had become its salvation.